Let's use some number tiles to investigate squares. I'm going to start by dragging out a bunch of squares here until we've got 36 squares. So I've got 36 squares dragged out in 3 groups of 10 and then a group of 6. The next step I want to do is try to form these squares into forming one big square. So I can do that by, I first need to break all these apart, so I'll go ahead and split them apart and then start moving some of them around. So I'll take this chunk here and move them down here. Take these 4 and move them to there, and then take the last 2 and move them down there. Once I've done that, I can see that I've now got a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 grid. And because it's filled in, it's a full square, there's none of the squares missing. For instance, it didn't end up like this. Because I've got everything filled in, I know that I've got a square, a full square, and when I measure them out, it turns out that the square is 6 by 6. Let's try a different question this time. Suppose we started off with 2 blocks of hundreds, and then I'll add in a couple more blocks of tens, and a third block of 10 that I'm going to then cut in half. So I've got 225 squares. I want to follow that same process to see if I can form these into a square. So I'll go ahead and split them apart, and then start rearranging. So I've been able to form a square, and if I count them up now, 15 across, and similarly, I'll have 15 down. So I end up with 15 by 15. With each side of the square being equal to 15, I know then that 15 is the square root of 225. Now let's see what happens if we try a number that doesn't work out quite so well. Supposing we started with a number like 200. I'd follow through the same process. Go ahead and split these apart and then split those apart. So I've got individual squares. And I'm going to go ahead and take a chunk of them and start rearranging them. So I end up in this case with a square that's 14 by 15. So what then if I tried to get it a little more consistent? I could take some of these off and I'll fill them in down here. See what happens when I move those around. I still don't quite have a perfect square. So because I don't have a perfect square, I know that my square root is going to lie somewhere between the numbers of 14 and 15. Without getting into too much detail, you can see that what you'd really need to be doing would be to take off those from the side. By doing that, we'd now have a 14 by 14 square. We'd have to then split these last 4 remaining ones into really, really thin pieces and put them along this side and along this side. So they'd both be a little bit more than 14, but not nearly as close as 15. So we know that the square root of 200 is going to be a little bit bigger than 14. So I might estimate that it's maybe going to be 14.1 as an example. You could do the exact calculation on your calculator, but you can see how working with the tiles gives you a sense of what the square root should be, regardless of the shape, the original shape that you start off with. If you move it towards being a square, it'll help you to understand what the square root would actually be.